The sun beat down mercilessly on the rolling plains of Montana Territory on June 25, 1876, as a vast Native American encampment stretched for miles along the Little Bighorn River. Thousands of Lakota, Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho, warriors, women, children, and elders, had gathered in a powerful assertion of their freedom and traditions. Against this backdrop rode Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry Regiment. What unfolded in those dusty hills became etched in American memory as Custer's Last Stand, a shocking defeat that stunned a nation celebrating its centennial and ignited endless debate about ambition, strategy, and cultural clash. To understand the drama, we must trace the tensions that led these forces into collision. The conflict's roots lay in broken treaties and westward expansion. The 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie had created the Great Sioux Reservation, including the Sacred Black Hills, known to the Lakota as Paha Sapa. But gold was discovered there in 1874 during an expedition led by Custer himself. Miners and settlers flooded in, violating the treaty. The U.S. government tried to buy the hills, but many Lakota leaders refused, viewing the land as spiritually inviolable. In late 1875, authorities issued an ultimatum. All bands must return to reservations by January 31, 1876, or face military action. Harsh winter and distance made compliance difficult for roaming hunters following the buffalo. When the deadline passed, the Army launched a campaign under General Philip Sheridan. 3 columns aimed to converge on the hostiles in southeastern Montana: Colonel John Gibbon from the west, General George Crook from the south, and Brigadier General Alfred Terry's Dakota Column, which included Custer's 7th Cavalry leaving Fort Abraham Lincoln on May 17th. Custer, a 36-year-old Civil War hero known for his daring, flamboyant style and long golden hair, commanded about 700 men, including officers, troopers, and Indian scouts from Arikara and Crow tribes who held grudges against the Sioux. On June 17th, Crook's force clashed with warriors led by Crazy Horse at the Battle of the Rosebud and was forced to withdraw. Custer, detached by Terry on June 22nd, pushed ahead to locate the village and block escape, with plans for a pincer movement. His scouts reported a huge pony herd and signs of a massive camp. Fearing the village would scatter after spotting his men, Custer rejected waiting for reinforcements and chose an immediate attack rather than the planned dawn assault the next day. Around noon, on June 25th, from a vantage called the Crow's Nest, scouts described a sprawling village of perhaps 1,000 lodges, with an estimated 1,100 to 2,500 warriors, far larger than Army intelligence had predicted. Custer made a critical decision. He divided his regiment into 3 battalions. Major Marcus Reno took 3 companies, about 140 men plus scouts, to charge the southern end of the village. Captain Frederick Benteen led another 3 companies, roughly 120 men, to scout southwest and block escape routes. Custer retained 5 companies, around 210 troopers, including his brothers Thomas and Boston, nephew Audie Reed, and brother-in-law James Calhoun, planning to swing north along the bluffs and strike the village from that direction. Reno's men advanced into the valley, but faced swift, fierce resistance from mobilizing warriors. Outnumbered, Reno halted short of the lodges, formed a skirmish line, then ordered a chaotic retreat across the river to bluffs above. The withdrawal was costly. His Arikara scout, Bloody Knife, was shot dead beside him, adding to the panic. Several soldiers fell during the scramble. Benteen's battalion soon linked up with Reno's battered force on the hilltop. Together, these roughly 400 men endured repeated assaults, digging shallow pits and holding a defensive perimeter amid thirst and exhaustion. Meanwhile, Custer's column moved northward, separated by broken terrain that prevented support between battalions. No white survivors from his immediate command lived to give a full account. Archaeological finds, spent cartridges, body positions, and native oral testimonies from warriors like Red Horse and others reconstruct a desperate running fight. Warriors under leaders, including Crazy Horse and Chief Gall, poured from the village, armed with bows, lances, and modern repeating rifles such as Henry and Winchester models that outpaced the cavalry's single-shot Springfield carbines. Custer's troopers dismounted on a ridge later called Last Stand Hill, forming skirmish lines. Intense close-quarters combat erupted as warriors closed in on horseback and foot. The fighting was brutal and swift. Custer reportedly directed fire until he fell, suffering wounds to the chest and left temple. His relatives and most of the command perished within about an hour. Bodies lay scattered across ridges and ravines, some in small defensive clusters, others where men tried to break free. The only living cavalry survivor from that sector was a wounded horse named Comanche, later nursed back to health as a symbol of loss. By late afternoon on June the 25th, the warriors turned fully against Reno and Benteen's position. The siege continued through the night and into June 26th with waves of attacks. Indian casualties for the entire battle are estimated between 31 and 100 killed, with many more wounded. Notable among the dead was Cheyenne leader Lame White Man. On the afternoon of June 26th, as Terry's column approached, the native forces broke off and moved their village upstream. The victory at what the Lakota called the Battle of the Greasy Grass was decisive for them, but came at a high cost in the broader war. The news of the disaster reached the eastern United States just days later, exploding across newspapers as the nation prepared to celebrate its centennial on July 4th, 1876. Headlines spoke of a massacre and called Custer a fallen hero. His dramatic death transformed him into a national martyr almost overnight. Paintings, books, and later Hollywood films romanticized Custer's last stand as a gallant defense by a small band of soldiers against overwhelming savage odds. Yet the reality revealed through archaeology, native oral histories, and survivor testimonies paints a more complex and chaotic picture. Reconstruction of Custer's final movements relies heavily on artifact distribution and Indian accounts. After separating from Reno, Custer's column moved north along the bluffs. Warriors, alerted and streaming from the massive village, engaged his men near Medicine Tail Coulee. Evidence suggests Custer may have attempted to cross the river or probe for a weak point, but faced immediate heavy fire. His companies fought a running battle, dismounting at intervals to form skirmish lines. Cartridge cases and bullet paths show fighting along Battle Ridge, from Calhoun Hill toward Keogh's position, and finally to what became known as Last Stand Hill. Warriors led by Chief Gall attacked from the south and southeast, while Crazy Horse and others swept in from the north and west, using the terrain skillfully to envelop the cavalry. The Lakota and Cheyenne possessed a surprising number of repeating rifles, Henry and Winchester models, that delivered rapid fire far superior to the soldiers' single-shot Springfield carbines, which often jammed in the heat of battle. Archaeological surveys after a 1983 grass fire recovered thousands of bullets and casings, revealing 47 different types of Indian firearms. This firepower, combined with sheer numbers, overwhelmed the troopers. On Last Stand Hill, roughly 50 to 60 men, including Custer and his staff, made their final stand. Officers attempted to maintain some order, but the fight devolved into desperate close-quarters combat. Warriors closed in on foot and horseback, using bows, lances, and rifles at point-blank range. Custer was reportedly among the last to fall, sustaining a chest wound and a shot to the left temple. His body was found with 2 wounds, but not mutilated as severely as some others, possibly due to recognition by certain warriors or rapid end of fighting. His brothers Thomas and Boston, nephew Audie Reed, and brother-in-law James Calhoun all died with him. In total, Custer's 5 companies, about 210 men, were annihilated within roughly 1 to 2 hours. The only living cavalry survivor from Custer's immediate field was Comanche, a badly wounded horse belonging to Captain Miles Keogh. Found on the battlefield, Comanche was nursed back to health and became a living symbol of the regiment's sacrifice, later paraded at ceremonies with empty stirrups. Meanwhile, on the bluffs several miles south, Reno and Benteen's combined force of around 400 men endured a fierce siege throughout the afternoon of June the 25th and all through the night. Warriors launched repeated attacks, forcing the soldiers to dig shallow rifle pits with knives and cups for protection. Thirst tormented the defenders under the blazing sun, and casualties mounted. 53 killed and about 60 wounded before relief arrived. The men held their perimeter through disciplined fire and courage, though debates later raged over whether they could or should have attempted to reach Custer. On the afternoon of June 26th, as General Terry's column finally approached from the north, the native forces broke off their assaults and began dismantling the huge village. They moved upstream, taking their dead and wounded. Total Army losses stood at 268 dead and 55 wounded, with most deaths occurring in Custer's command. Indian casualties are harder to pin down due to differing accounts and the mobile nature of the tribes, but estimates range from about 31 to over 100 killed, with many more wounded. Among the fallen was the Cheyenne warrior, Lame White Man. The victory at the Greasy Grass, as the Lakota called the Little Bighorn, represented a powerful moment of resistance. Sitting Bull's earlier vision during a Sundance had foretold soldiers falling into the camp like grasshoppers from the sky. Leaders like Crazy Horse demonstrated brilliant battlefield tactics, coordinating attacks that exploited the divided cavalry and superior mobility. For the tribes, it was a defense of families, homes, and their traditional way of life against relentless encroachment. Yet the triumph proved short-lived in the larger Great Sioux War. The shocking defeat galvanized the U.S. Army. Reinforcements poured into the region, and pressure intensified on all Lakota and Cheyenne bands. Within a year, the Agreement of 1877 forced the cession of the Black Hills. Crazy Horse surrendered in 1877 and was killed soon after under disputed circumstances. Sitting Bull fled to Canada before returning and surrendering in 1881. The free-roaming, buffalo-hunting life of the Plains Indians was coming to an end, accelerated by the very battle that had briefly halted American expansion. Today, the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument preserves the site where these events unfolded. Archaeological investigations continue to refine our understanding, mapping bullet trajectories and troop movements with modern technology. Native oral histories from warriors such as Red Horse, Standing Bear, and others provide essential perspectives that balance the long-dominant cavalry narratives. These accounts describe the panic in the village when the soldiers appeared, the bravery of young warriors, and the sorrow for lost relatives on both sides. The Battle of the Little Bighorn remains one of the most studied and debated events in American history. It symbolizes the clash between manifest destiny and indigenous sovereignty, the dangers of underestimating an enemy, and the human cost of cultural collision. Custer's ambition, the warrior's determination, the failures of coordination, and the courage displayed by soldiers and fighters alike remind us that history is rarely simple. Victory and defeat look very different, depending on who tells the story. What happened on those hot June days in 1876 continues to fascinate because it captures a pivotal moment when two worlds collided, leaving a legacy of legend, loss, and lessons that still echo across the American West.